Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Spitler with All Designs Equine. Today we're going to be making a Christmas Crescent swag wreath with a rustic Western stirrup hanging in the middle. You can do an English stirrup, of course, but this is an order, so I decided to just video an order that I have to do already since Christmas is already crazy. And of course you can hear that I am also sick, which is lovely. So I'm using this wood base for the crescent shape that I designed that has a hole for hanging already, and also that I can use these holes for stability. I'll show you what I mean in a second. But you can also use half of a wreath, just a 24-inch wreath. So you don't have to have this base. You can just cut this in half and this will make the crescent shape. And it also is really nice because it's easier to glue things in this wreath already. So this is all you need. You don't need this. Of course, I can link where you can buy these crescents, and I'll link that in the description below. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different today though. Since I keep getting so many questions about like how I started my Etsy shop, and how I came into business, I decided that I would describe how I'm doing the wreath and give some tips about Etsy in particular as well. I do have my own website, but starting your own website is very labor intensive. And Etsy, you can start an Etsy shop literally in an hour. It's so user-friendly and easy. So let me get started with the wreath portion of this first. I'm going to take a rectangular piece of styrofoam, and you would not need styrofoam for the half wreath because you have things that you can already glue in, so you wouldn't need this part. But if you were using this frame, you need a little piece of styrofoam. So I push that in so it stays in really good. Now, I'm just taking pieces of garland and I cut it about the length of that. And I'm gonna glue them into the sides of the styrofoam. I'm gonna do the same one. I already have this pre-cut. And this is gonna help me to have a place to glue in some of the pine and the decorations, but also it's going to cover the base. And so I'm also going to twist the wire pine in the back here. So like I'm going to run this through and I'm just going to twist it so it's stable. Excuse me. So, I started my Etsy shop about 8 or 9 years ago, probably 8 years ago. I found myself single with 3 children, and I was a horse trainer, and I needed to make some extra money. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to paint some shirts, which originally I wanted to have my own shirts for my own training business. So I thought, well, you know what? I don't know if people hand paint shirts, but that's what I'm going to do because I was an artist. So I could, I decided to make a stencil and I cut it with an X-Acto knife after a drawing, and I made my own shirts. And as I was wearing them to the barn, my clients loved the shirts and bought some. And that's when my niece suggested that I start my own Etsy shop. So Etsy's super easy to get started on, and I would just suggest you have 10 things to start your collection with. You don't want to start an Etsy shop basically you have less than 10 things because people won't be interested really, and it doesn't look very legit. And I'm also going to staple this pine, but that would be the minimum I would start. But I just researched by actually searching on Etsy for hand-painted shirts, and there was one other person that did it. So I knew that someone else had done it. So I did my research on like how well the paint would adhere to the shirt after washing. I did my own like demos to make sure it would work. And I knew that the market wasn't saturated since there was only one, maybe two other people that were doing it, but that it wasn't so novel that no one did it at all. If you can't find something that you're interested in doing, or if you find something that you're interested in doing and you search for it and there's nobody else doing it, it's probably an indication that there's a reason that nobody else is doing it. And that's because people aren't interested. Now, that's not 100% fact, but it's pretty close. So you definitely want to do and make sure that there's somebody else doing what you're doing, but that there are not so many people that you have so much competition. Like, you do not want to compete against Walmart. Jewelry is another one that is not great to do on Etsy because there's over 1 million jewelry sellers. The only reason I would say it would be okay to do jewelry is if it's very niche. So like if I was doing equestrian jewelry, that's very niche, and that would probably work out. All right, so now I'm gonna start adding the pine spray here, and I'm going to make it sort of like in a bow tie shape in the beginning, because we like it to stick a little bit like that, and then come down like that. And that's how I'm gonna build the shape of the wreath. So after you do your market research, which is what you should do before you start any business anyway, and you've decided on what you might be interested in doing, you need to find out who your competition is. And then you need to do it 10 times better. So that's the biggest secret, I would say, is that you need to always make sure that you are doing things better, which is very hard for a shop to do in the beginning because it's a learning curve. Believe me, I wasn't better than anything, but I tried to master my craft that I would be better than anybody, and that I would have people trying to chase me instead of me chasing other shops trying to do things better, if that makes sense. All right, so I've cut off all this pine, and we're gonna start building the shape. You can use any kind of pine, really, just whatever you like. This is a very basic crescent wreath. It's not, doesn't have a lot of components to it. And we want to have the longer pieces down here. My goal in the beginning was to make an extra $400 a month. So to do about $800 in sales a month. But of course, I did not know what I was doing. And I didn't actually make my first sale on Etsy for almost a year, which I know would be depressing to most people. But I did have another job, and I was really focused on that, and I was selling other things outside of Etsy. Then my girlfriend, who was also one of my clients, said, "Hey, did you ever make or see a horse head wreath?" And I was like, "No." And so she showed me like a picture, and I was like, wow, that the person that did the wreath did not do a very good job. But she said, "Hey, my aunt sells tons of these." I was like, wow, I could do that so much better. As being like a wedding florist, I knew how to do flowers. But honestly, my first pine horsehead wreaths were not that good. But I did them differently than everybody else did, because in the beginning, people were taking chicken wire, making a shape with chicken wire, and then attaching the pine. And I thought, wow, this is just not a very good way to do it. So that's how I started my method, which was taking a regular 24-inch pine wreath, cutting it in half, and starting like with a basic candy cane shape. and then shaping the horse head. And that video, I actually have a video of me doing that. I think that's the first video I've ever done in this on my channel. So I can link that also below. It's the Soul of Wood horse, and I show how I make a horse head from a candy cane shape of a half of a, not a half, by cutting a 24-inch wreath in half. So doing it that way was my first innovation, because nobody, and I don't even think anybody does it that way now. I'm the only person that I know that does it that way. People are either stapling the pine to like wood forms or doing it the chicken wire way. I've never seen anybody else do it any other way than the way that I do it. So that was kind of my first innovation. And I had kind of a surprise that I put those in my shop. They, like I said, they weren't that great. We're also going to be taking this more floppy pine, and we're going to be adding that now in this shape. I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to build out the shape from there. So I was walking out of the barn after, you know, going home from training for the day, and all of a sudden, it was a Black Friday, I believe, I started getting all these orders coming in for these horse head wreaths. And to me, it was very overwhelming, because basically I went from no orders, or very few, to a bunch of orders. So I wasn't really prepared, but it was very exciting. Christmas time is always a great time to start getting orders. So if you start a business, expecting to have some orders at Christmas time is a good way to go from the frying pan to the fire. So that's how I ended up starting doing my horse head wreaths. And I did luck out in the summer after that experience in the winter of actually getting, I probably literally sold $10,000 all year, but it was mostly horse head wreaths. And it was mostly November and December. So I was like, wow, maybe I could really do something with this. So, and then my lucky break actually came when Practical Horseman magazine actually reached out to me and said, hey, we want to do a Christmas gift giving article. We'd like you to be in the article. And I was actually in the front page of the article. I can try to link that picture also, and that was my big break. And then I got hammered with orders. And once you get a lot of orders, Etsy says, oh, this person can actually make us money. So they start showing your stuff. And I know that it seems like overwhelming. Well, how would you get into a magazine? I mean, it's really not hard to get into a magazine if you really want to. You find a magazine in your niche. You do some really good photos of your products, and you try to do an inventive and just something that the magazine would want. And you just reach out to the editor with some pictures and some links. And they need to fill up their magazine every month. So if you have a good product that is related to their magazine, 9 times out of 10, if it is good, will be interested in featuring you. And that's what I did with my daughter. I had her start her own Catastrophe Treasures Etsy shop, and I told her, hey, the best thing to do to get started, reach out to magazines. She reached out to magazines. It was Cat Fancy. I don't know what it's called now, but the original was Cat Fancy. Excuse me. And they featured her, and she did $80,000 in sales for her first year. So it is definitely possible. Now I'm going to kind of build it out a little bit this way. And then we're going to start adding these decorations to make this look a little bit more lively. But this is a very simple crescent wreath. This definitely has like the least amount of floof in it and decorations. It's very simple, but a lot of people do like these really simple wreaths because theoretically maybe you could even, you know, keep it up all winter. Okay, so we're gonna kind of make it drape a little bit more. So the hardest part, of course, is really finding a product that you can do well, that isn't overly saturated, but people are doing still, and to make it better. That's the biggest thing. Make it better. If you can make something 10 times better than somebody else, eventually you can even charge what you want to charge for it. If you're the innovator, if you do things better. In the beginning, it's very hard to charge like a top dollar for something until you know that you are really worthy of it, or you're doing something very innovative that nobody else is doing. So I do a lot of innovative things that other people don't do. Another big thing I did, the two big things that I did were the carrot wreath and a seahorse wreath. And those both went crazy. And of course, people always were trying to steal my ideas, but they never could do them as well. So it doesn't really matter. People get really mad when people steal their ideas, but if you're always doing it better, it doesn't really matter. They're chasing you. Okay, so I'm using this long, like drapey pine, and I'm gonna add it to the ends to make it really crescent-y. Okay, so people like really love this part of it. And this is another thing that people don't really do, are these crescent wreaths. But I did get this idea from my wedding business and having to do kind of this shape over like archways. And I thought, wow, it would be cool if I could hang like a stirrup in the middle of it. Okay, so we're gonna use this. I got at Michael's. It's like a very AC looking winter pick that is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm gonna cut this apart and add this in here. Like I said, this is a very simplistic wreath, and you can do whatever you want to do with it, but this is how this lady ordered it. And I'm gonna just cut everything apart and add it in, keeping with the shape of the wreath. So to recap on some tips for Etsy, you want to think of a product that you can make handmade. Then you want to do some market research by Googling on Etsy and Googling even elsewhere to see if anyone's selling that product. You want to gauge the competition level so it's not crazy amount of competition, because then you're just kind of like in a sea of products and you have to break out of that, which can be very difficult. But unless you have something extremely innovative, I would try to find a product that there's definitely some competition, but not an unreasonable amount of competition. You don't want to be going against big box stores. You don't want to be going against literally a million different shops. Then once you find your product, once you figure out what you want to sell, once you find your competition, you want to make sure, and this is the tricky part, actually the trickiest part is probably figuring out what to sell and what to make and what you're good at and what you're interested in, which is always the best, to do something you're interested in. But you want to make sure that you can do it 10 times better or put a twist on it somehow and make it 10 times better. If you're not going to make something 10 times better, then I wouldn't even bother, really. I mean, you could always go like, oh, I'll make it cheaper. But in reality, there's no way you can make something better if you're making it cheaper 9 times out of 10. So I'm just going to keep kind of going with the flow of this. Excuse me. And or just put a twist on it, make it somehow innovative, do something different, because you will get lost. If you're just trying to do something, but it's not better or innovative or something is different about it, then chances are you're not going to do all that well because you're starting behind the 8 ball. Doesn't mean you can't, but you want to start with the best, chance of being seen, being productive, being able to sell your product. You want to start ahead. Now, there will be lots and lots of things that you do wrong, but starting with those things in mind will give you a leg up on the competition. And you just always want to try to being ahead where people are trying to chase your ideas instead of you chasing their ideas. But all this can take a little bit of time. So I always recommend, have another job. Don't think you're going to necessarily have quick success, but think of it more as a building block, something to add. It's always good to have lots of eggs in different baskets, not all in the same. So I didn't quit my training job until COVID hit. I'm gonna also be adding this different kind of like snowy, it's almost like a fern. I don't even know what it is, but I think it'll look good. And I need more fullness through here, so I'm gonna use that. But as I was saying, when COVID hit, all the barns shut down. So basically, I had a small Etsy business where I was just using it to make extra money. It wasn't my main source of income. But when they shut all the barns down and I couldn't train, and I did not have an LLC, so there was really no way to collect money. So I had to pivot very quickly, and I'm like, I need to just throw everything into my Etsy business and quick. So I turned all my attention to my Etsy business, which ended up paying off. So I did as much research as I could on just increasing my traffic, and I just researched on how to do things better. That's when I started doing my wood horse heads instead of the pine ones. And that's how I kind of got and grew my business so much bigger, because I took all my energy, time, and effort because I really didn't have a choice. So COVID, even though it was a terrible time and a scary time, it actually, online sales went nuts. So it worked out for me. Although a lot of people who could not pivot very quickly, it did not work out for, which is really sad. But when you're in business, you have to be able to pivot. You have to change. You cannot stay the same. You cannot stay the same doing the same thing over and over again, because people will just tire of it. And I learned that the hard way when, okay, that's looking a little better. I'm definitely going to have to add still some more up here. But I learned that the hard way when I just kept doing the same thing, and I just realized, okay, wait, I'm not getting the same amount of sales. So I have to do things differently. I've got to be innovative. So I started making these crescents and some swag wreaths and some different things. My seahorse wreath, because I knew that people were like, okay, I bought these horse heads for now 3 years. There's so many people now offering them because, like I said, people will try to copy you, and that's fine. But people were copying me, and then also they were a lot cheaper. And even if they weren't as good, people were still deciding to buy from that. So I'm like, okay, I've got to do something different because this is not working anymore. So, and I could have gone back and tried to do another magazine, but when you do that, you do have to be prepared that you're going to get killed with business, especially at Christmas time. So, and you have to do it months in advance. Like, Christmas magazines come out in like September. They're working on their stories in August. That's when Practical Horseman magazine contacted me. It was in August. So you have to be really ahead of the game and know that if you're trying to get into the Christmas edition, you need to be thinking about that in the summertime. And that is a little tricky. But you also have to be prepared that if it takes off, you have to be able to make everything that you need to make. And it can be really intense. But that is another way to get yourself started. And you really do have to drive your own Etsy traffic, especially in the beginning, because Etsy will provide some traffic, but they prefer to provide traffic to people that they know sell. They will give you a bump in the very beginning when you open your shop, but after that, you kind of have to drive your own traffic for a little bit, at least, minimally. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you've got to learn all that stuff, and that's another kind of difficult thing. But as long as you, I think Facebook, minimally, get a business page. Okay, so you can see that it's coming, we're almost there. Okay, so you can see it's very simple, but it's very pretty. And we're gonna add some more pine cones to it though. So I like these like frosted looking pine cones. They're snowy looking pine cones. I'll put the smaller ones down here and the bigger ones up top. Since this wreath tapers, it's fuller up here, it's thinner down here. And do some more pine cones. Then, of course, we're going to put a burlap bow in the middle. And the burlap is just something I use all the time because it goes a lot with the equestrian stuff. And instead of trying to stock 800 different kinds of ribbon that you can't find again, I just try to stick with a few different types. Because it does get hard when stores don't sell the same things, you run out of stock. It is a problem. There are definitely some problems when you have to, having your own business is definitely great, but it's also difficult. And you definitely don't get your own hours like everyone says you do. You have to basically work really hard, and it's hard to even take time off because it becomes like a baby and you just have to keep nurturing it. All right, so this basically is done, believe it or not. I'm gonna add the bow, I'm gonna add the Western stirrup, and then we're good to go. So I'm gonna teach you how to make a bow one more time. Well, I don't know, maybe not one more time, but at least now. Okay, here's how you make a florist bow. You make a loop, you take another loop, and you come back to the middle. Okay, that's the biggest loops. Then you're gonna make one slightly smaller, come to the middle, Make one slightly smaller, come back to the middle, slightly smaller, slightly smaller. In the middle, you have this little tiny loop, which is the classic. And then we're gonna cut that off. And then we're gonna take the little tail, cut that off. I do make these little notches just to finish it a little bit. Okay, so it looks like that. You're going to take your wire, if I can grab it here, put it in the middle. You don't want the wire super long because it will lose. You need to have kind of a thick wire because we're going to be pushing it into the styrofoam. Okay, and then we're going to cut it off. Okay. Then we're going to kind of pull it apart, like take two loops, pull them apart from each other, pull them apart. Same thing on the other side, pull it apart. Pull it apart. Okay, and then you're going to push it in here. All right. Put this in the middle. Push it down in. And I'm going to let it glue before I actually spread it apart again, because I'll end up pulling it out. And it's gonna look kind of crazy right now. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip this over. Here's the back. And I will cover up this styrofoam because I don't like that stuff showing at all. And any styrofoam on the top, I'll take extra pine and I will cover that. So this is just a piece of ribbon. I'm gonna staple it. If you don't have a staple, you could just wire this and wire it through. And there's a lot of different things you can do. But if you have, if you're using a regular wreath, you don't need to staple. There's no stapling involved. People like this usually generally a little longer so they can see it. Staple, 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 staple. Okay. And then I'm going to glue it. I glue the staples. I will cover it with a pad, and then I take two other pads and I put it down here because I don't want it to scratch the door. But basically, here is a crescent wreath that everyone loves. Definitely a huge seller. Something that is pretty unique. All right, and then I will just floof this up and you will have your wreath. All right, I'm not sure what I'm doing for my next video, but I'm going to be trying to give some different tips for Etsy sellers while I do wreaths. And people can always ask me questions in the comments. But if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, thank you.